Hello guys, this is Anurag Sharma and today I'll be discussing with you a common man's problem, that is inflation. I extend my humble namaskar to all of you. Inflation in Hindi is called as Mehengai, and there is one famous song about Mehengai in movie Peoply Life that goes like this, that Mehengai daim khaye jaat hai. So today I'll be discussing with you this problem of inflation, this Mehengai. So let's begin. What's Mehengai? That is inflation. So when there is a persistent rise in price, that situation is known as inflation. So whenever there is a general increment of price, a general increasing trend of prices, that situation is known as inflation. Inflation is that state where too much money can chase too few goods. So means the purchasing power of the money is falling due to the inflation. So inflation refers to any increase in the general price level which is sustained and non-seasonal in nature. So by seeing these explanations, we can gather certain idea that what is inflation. In the words of famous economist named Johnson, he explained inflation in different way, and listen to me very carefully that what he said about inflation, that inflation is an increase in the quantity of money faster than the real national output is expanding. So when there is too much money in the system, in the economy, but in correspondence there is no real increase, there is no corresponding increase in the national output of the economy, that situation is known as inflation. So there are two things. One thing is that there is an increasing trend of the general price level, and there is too much money in the system. Both of those situations, it leads to the inflation, and that is the increasing prices. So inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices of goods and services is rising, and consequently the purchasing power of currency is falling. So again, there are two things happening. Number one, that the general level of price of goods and services is rising and the purchasing power of currency is falling. So let's try to understand this scenario with the help of this example. Now suppose you are buying 1 kg of sugar, 1 kg of sugar at rupees 100 today, and after 1 month price of sugar is increased to rupees 120. So there is 20% increase in the price of sugar. Now that 20% increase is inflation rate. Now again, let's go to this line, that there are two things happening. One, the prices are rising. See, the price goes up to from 100 to 120, and purchasing power of money is also falling. Why? Because we are buying the same quantity of sugar, but the price is more as comparison to the previous month. So that scenario is known as inflation. So there are various characteristics of inflation. That what is the features of inflation? That number one, the general price level rises, the purchasing power of the money falls, it is sustained in nature, it is non-seasonal in nature. These two points are very important. One is sustained and one is non-seasonal. We can understand that due to seasonal variation, there may be certain increase in the price level of certain commodities. For example, in winters, definitely the price of woolen items will go up, but in inflation, but that increase in price cannot be termed as inflation because it is due to season. But in inflation, that increase in price is non-seasonal and it is sustained for long period. Then quantity of money increases as comparison to goods and services produced, as Johnson has explained it in a very precise way, that it is the increase in the quantity of money, it is the increase in the supply of money, but the correspondingly real national income output is not expanding. That situation, that scenario is known as inflation. Now let's discuss what are the various types of inflation. There are so many types of inflation, but we will discuss the major one. The first one is open inflation. Open inflation is that type of inflation, guys, where there are no administrative or government steps are taken to control the prices. So in this process, in this type of inflation, prices are allowed to rise without any attempt of the government. As there is no attempt of the government, only market forces handles the inflation. So that's why this type of inflation is known as open inflation, because there is no administrative control of the government to control the rising prices. The next inflation is suppressed inflation. It is totally opposite to the open inflation. In open inflation, there is no control whatsoever from the government authority, and in suppressed inflation, there is a control, there is an administrative measures to check the increasing prices level. For example, the rationing system in India, that is known as public distribution system, the price control techniques, these measures comes under the suppressed inflation. And it is a general belief that suppressed inflation is more evil than the open inflation. We should why? Because whenever there is very strict control from any authority, there are certain tendency which will give rise to the give rise to certain evils. For example, hoarding, black marketing. So these administrative control may lead to the birth of these type of evils. Then comes wartime inflation. So in order to meet war expenses, government increases the supply of money. They print money like anything to meet the war expenses, and the large proportion of money is directed towards the manufacturing of war goods. And there is no attempt to attention is paid to consumer goods, and as the supply of money is diverted from consumer goods to war goods. So that is why this scenario leads to the increase in the price level of the consumer goods. Then comes post-war inflation. Now war has happened, but due to war there are destruction. There is destruction. To rebuild the nation once again, government has to spend large amount on the repair and reconstruction of the infrastructure, and so that is why there are heavy taxes levied, and public is also repaid, which leads to the increase in the supply of money. So again, this leads to the increase in supply of money. There is a situation of heavy taxes, but correspondingly there is no increase in the production of goods and services. So that scenario also leads to the inflation. And again, as I explained in the characteristics and in the introductory slide, that all these factors leads to the give rise to the inflation. Then comes peacetime inflation. Now, developing economy like us and underdeveloped economies like certain African countries or certain Asian countries, we need to spend large resources on the infrastructure building. We need to spend large amount of money on economic planning, and to mobilize these type of resources, government has to resort to the deficit financing. What is deficit financing? Whenever there is a gap of income and expenditure, that gap is when there is more expenditure but less income. Again, I will quote one Hindi movie, that Amdani Athanni Kharcha Rupaya. So there is a gap of again a 50 paisa. To meet that expense, to cover that expense, government goes to deficit financing, means they print more money. But that deficit financing again leads to the inflation, and it gives rise to the rise in general price level of inflation. Now, on the basis of speed of inflation or rate of inflation, inflation can be categorized into 4 categories. One is creeping inflation, that price rise is very slow, up to 3% annual increase in the prices. It is known as creeping inflation. After creeping, then comes walking inflation. Price rise becomes very intense, and quantum of inflation gains momentum, and the rise between 3 to 8% per annum is known as walking inflation. When we start walking, what happens next? We start running. So when inflation starts running, what happens? Rate of inflation goes goes in between 8 to 15%, and it is in a very short period. So in short period, the rise is more, and that type of situation is known as running inflation. And the last inflation and the most dangerous type of inflation is known as hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is also known as the Hydra head monster of inflation. You must be familiar with this legend, Hydra head monster, that when you cut the one neck, the two will born. So this is the Hydra head inflation, and it is in this type of inflation, the rate of inflation goes beyond 15%. So these are on the basis of speed of inflation. Now comes the wage induced inflation. Whenever there is increase in wages, there will be increase in wages, so production cost will go up, and production cost will go up, then prices will increase. Then comes profit induced or markup inflation. Now when prices are set on very high margin, again price margin is very high, the markup is very high, it will lead to the increase in the prices, and that increase is known as inflation and profit induced inflation. Then deficit induced inflation, it is that type of inflation which comes because of deficit financing. I explained it just now, that it takes place due to the increase in money supply in the wake of deficit. To meet that gap of 50 paisa, amdani athani and kharcha rupaya, we have spent more and we have earned less. So we need to, we need to bridge that gap, and to bridge that gap, government lands to deficit financing. But due to that deficit financing, there is no corresponding increase in the supply of goods and services. There is no expansion of the national output of the economy. So even that situation leads to the deficit induced inflation. Then comes demand pull inflation. In any book, that explanation of inflation will start with this demand pull inflation. But I have explained it in later stage because I wanted to make you understand that what is the foundation of inflation. So what is demand pull inflation? It is that inflation which arises due to the excessive demand, and that is happening in India. Why? Because there is, we are the second largest country in terms of population, and there are certain surveys are coming that we will, in very short period we will bypass, we will overtake China in terms of population. Now, due to heavy population, there is increase in demand of consumer goods as well, and there is the net increase in the aggregate demand, but supply is less. So due to that, there is a gap of demand and supply. Demand is more, supply is less. People are demanding more, but there is no supply, or there is less supply. That situation is known as demand pull inflation. That inflation is pulled by demand, and this imbalance causes that. Then comes cost push inflation. Again, in most of the books you will, this topic of inflation starts with demand pull and cost push, but I have explained it in later stage so that you can get a better idea of it. So it is also known as the supply side of inflation. So demand side of inflation is demand pull, supply side of inflation is known as cost push inflation. Now what is happening over here? There is an increase in the cost of production. The production, wages are increasing, the cost of raw material is increasing, transportation is, cost of transportation is increasing. So everything leads to the increase in cost of production. Now there is increase in cost, so definitely there will be increase in price as well, and that type of inflation is cost push inflation. Now, why there is an increase of cost of production? It may happen because of cost of raw material, it may happen because of wages, it may happen due to the taxes and duties. So that is a basic introduction that what is inflation. I believe you get a basic idea that why it is called as problem. But in developing economy like us, a creeping inflation and walking inflation is somehow acceptable. Why? Because we are a developing economy, we are spending large resources on development, so that is why that may lead to increase in inflation. But when that infrastructure is built, so that inflation will eventually come down. In the next lesson, the second part of inflation, I will discuss the various causes and various remedies of inflation. So till then, love learning and have a great day ahead. Thank you.